book of Job, and we are looking at, we're going to finish up. We're pretty much on chapter 2, but we're going to finish up a little bit about what we looked at in chapter 1. Now, the thing that we recognize with Job, now we finished this up and we recognize that, okay, we started off with this guy, Job, and he was just, listed by God as being a man after that. It was like, following the word of God. They said he was very great. He had great substance. He had 7 sons. He had 3 daughters. He was perfect and upright. He feared God. All right. And he was one that would go and offer up sacrifices for his children. Job was somebody that we would look at as being a person that was doing what he knew. And we tried to highlight that because one of the things we're going to recognize is that Job certainly was not the perfect man. There's only one perfect man, and that was when God came in flesh and became a man, and that was Jesus. But Job was one that he would try to do all that he knew. But one thing that we've learned is that we are not saved by just knowledge. We're saved by what? The grace of God. We're saved by the death, burial, and resurrection. That's what saves us. That's what brings us into a right relationship. However, with that being said, what Job was doing was significant. He was trying to uphold what he knew. Now, with that happening, what we are then introduced to in chapter 1 is that there was another situation happening. One that Job knew nothing about. He was not aware of it. He did not have any insight of it. He didn't have any vote. He didn't have any input. And in this situation, it said that the sons of God came and presented themselves unto God, the Father. And we talk about these as being the sons of God, and we could go through a long study. We could spend, 5-6 hours just going through all the different things that are talked about these so-called sons of God. We could go to Genesis 6 and look about those sons of God that came and saw the women of man, that they were beautiful. We could go into Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and look at the descriptions that are given about Satan before his fall. And we can go into a variety of other scriptures, but I think we'll just kind of mention that. Those are things that we can kind of talk about as we go on later, a little bit within the study. But what we want to focus on is that there was another realm, and it's called the spiritual realm. The Bible talks about it a lot. We oftentimes forget about it a lot of times in our everyday activity. We forget that our battle is happening there, and we're trying to focus on the natural. So let's look at this. And so we see that when Satan was addressed by God, and he asked him, "Where have you come from?" We saw that in our last study, that Satan said, "I've come from the earth," going to and fro, up and down. And he's going all over the earth, looking for someone he can devour. And God said, "Have you considered Job?" And Satan said, "Well, I have considered him, but I can't get to him because you protected him. He serves you for naught." Does he serve you for naught? In other words, is there no reason? Of course there's a reason. From Satan's point of view, he's serving you because you blessed him on every end, on every side. You've given him everything, every measure. He's been held up, sustained, and blessed. And so what the Lord says is that, okay, I'm going to do something here. And what the Lord does is something that, if you ask me, say, well, why would God do that? I can give you my own superficial human reasoning, but you know what I would be doing? I would be doing exactly what the rest of this book of Job is about. These friends of Job are going to give all their reasonings as to why God allows certain things. And so I'm going to not just continue in doing that. I'm going to allow the wisdom of God to be above my wisdom and just say God knows why. And then I just got to do what? Trust that. Now, I can speculate. I can say, well, it was a test. We definitely know that the scripture tells us that God will not put more on you than you're able to bear. So in God's wisdom, he obviously knew Job would come out of this victoriously. Otherwise, God would not have allowed it. And there's a lot of different other kinds of obvious items I can point out. But we'll see those once again as we go through this. But what I want to look at, and we kind of rushed through it last week, which is why I want to revisit it now and kind of take my time. When the Lord said, and this is in verse 8 of that first chapter, he said, and the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? And then Satan answered and said, does Job serve you for naught? All right. What verse is that? I want to look for that. Verse 10. It says, no, actually, verse 11. Let's see. No, actually, verse 10. So look at verse 10. It says, have not, this is Satan speaking, have not thou made a hedge about him? All right. Now, that's telling us that Satan recognized that there was a hedge around Job. Now, is this the kind of hedges that's in your backyard that you go out and cut? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a hedge around him spiritually. He's protected by the presence and the power of God. It says, and about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side. So it wasn't just Job, it was Job's household and everything, his businesses, his affiliations, his children, there was a hedge about. All right. It says, and has thou blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But then Satan says, and this is the challenge that Satan makes. Look at verse 11. But put forth thy hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. Now, this is why this happens to Job. And if you ask me, why did it happen? From a standpoint of how. How did it come about? And I guess that's a better answer. Let me say, I'm not answering the why, I'm answering the how. How did this happen? Well, it happened because Satan threw up a challenge to the challenge that God threw. God said, have you considered Job? Satan says, yeah, I consider him. But I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. And this is Satan doing, let's make a deal. You remove that protection, and I can make him curse you. Now, this is what Satan is trying to get. A compromise or a maneuver or a switch. And we're going to see that as we go through this, that these are very similar things that have happened before. Satan, and Satan will use again. He used this same type of philosophy and trickery in the garden. When Satan met Jesus in the wilderness, he used very similar kind of philosophy. Well, if you do this, then I can get this done. And if I do this, will you do that? So he's always trying to find that kind of compromise and that kind of agreement that they can find ways to just agree with him. But we can't agree with the enemy in no way, shape, or form. But let's keep going. Let's look at this. And remember, Job knows nothing about this. Look at verse 12. And I think this is the key. And the Lord said, and nothing would have happened if the Lord didn't say. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Now, right then we have to stop. And like I said, we didn't have time to kind of stop on that last week. What he said was, all that he has is in your power. Now, we were looking at Job's what? Natural stuff. We were looking at all of his natural things that he had. He had the houses and the lands and the good job and the camels and all of that, the wonderful children. And in the spiritual realm, God says all the natural things that Job has, He said, all he has is in the power. Only upon himself put not forth thy hand. And then it says, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And we talked about that last week, how he just jetted, didn't waste no time. You know, we always hear some people say, well, somebody's busy as the devil, and we use that as a phrase, saying that Satan is always busy trying to cause problems. And we see some of the evidences as to where people get that phraseology from, because the minute he says go, Satan went forth. Now, all of this happened in a realm that right now, with our current ability, we don't see. We only see the natural. We do not see the spiritual. And you're going to hear me harping on this because I'm trying to make sure that we understand where the real problem is. We oftentimes trying to attack the wrong thing. All right. So let's go ahead. And we saw that in verse 13. Now, I want you to watch how spiritual things manifest themselves in the natural when Satan puts his hands on it. So it says in verse 13, and there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the elder brother's house. And there came a message unto Job, saying that the oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans. Okay, right there we want to stop. The Sabaeans. Are the Sabaeans demons? Are they spiritual zombies? No. The Sabaeans are a tribe, a host of people, a nation of folk that for whatever reason decided that they're going to come down, and this is our opportunity. They got in their mind, some way or somehow, this is the time now for us to go and to take Job's oxen and to take Job's donkeys. We're going to take them all. And then it says the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away, and they have slain the servants. So not only are we going to take the donkeys and we're going to take the oxen, but we're going to kill the servants, because the servants are going to try to fight to keep them. Well, we're going to kill them. We're going to kill them all but one. And that one person that we're going to leave alive is the messenger. Now, wait a minute. What's going on here? Did the Sabaeans all of a sudden wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Why are they deciding to fight today as opposed to fighting the day before? See, now we know the answer to this, and this is where there's a lot of stuff in this book when it comes down to why God does certain things that we might not be able to say, well, you know, I'm not sure why God did this. But when we look at this action here, we can see a direct correlation. The Sabaeans are attacking Job and his servants and his wealth because Satan gave them what? Power and an ability and authority, because they attacked, and the attack was what? Successful. But wait a minute. This attack on Job from Satan that was successful, but God was still doing what? Watching over Job. Now, in most people's math, that don't add up. That's a problem. A lot of people say, well, if that's the kind of God you serve, I don't want to serve that God, because they're looking at the fact that they are only counting on the natural achievement. And I have to admit, this is difficult. It's hard to just sit here and go, well, I'm still blessed. I still know the God. But that's why you have to have faith. And you have to see it as a spiritual thing. And the reason why I keep harping on the spiritual is because if you don't lock into this is spiritual, your faith will fail, because you're going to be frustrated in the flesh. And if you're frustrated in the flesh, and trust me, I can identify. I think we all can probably say, yeah, I've been there, done that. But then once you read something like this, and then you go and reflect and remember, wow, I remember I acted like this when this happened and that's happened. Not realizing that all I'm doing is allowing my flesh to just have its way. And sometimes we have to stop and look and recognize, I don't care how fleshly this may seem, and this certainly is fleshy. Those are fleshly ox and fleshly donkeys, and those servants were real people, it's still a spiritual war. And how we find in our minds the ability to reconcile that when we're going through difficult times and everything in us is frustrated is where we're going to learn to walk by faith and not by what? Sight. All right, let's keep going though. We're not done. So that servant comes and he tells him what happened, and he says, only I am escaped to tell thee. And look at verse 16. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God. This is what the messenger is saying. See, the messenger don't know. He didn't know that Satan had this conversation. But we know who lit this fire. It says the fire of God, but we know the fire came from what? God allowed Satan to light this fire. The fire of God is fallen from heaven and have burnt up the sheep. So now we got the best illustration we could say is that probably lightning, or it could be some actual fire. I mean, who knows? I wasn't there. But either way, lightning or fire came down and burnt up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So once again, we have this accidental situation that happens. Was God aware of it? Did Satan surprise God? Satan didn't surprise God at all. God knew exactly what was going on. Is Job in a situation where God is saying, I'm going to punish you for your sin? That's not the situation, because that's not what God said. God said that Job was a righteous man and upright. So what Job knew to do, he was doing it. But yet we still have this circumstance that comes along. So what are we supposed to do? I mean, your heart's broken. You just lost. You're just watching your life work get stolen and destroyed. But we're not done. Verse 17. While he yet was speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am alone, escaped alone to tell thee. So now we got another situation, very similar to the Sabaeans, all right, the Chaldeans. We're going to hear some more about the Chaldeans, because that group is going to continue to grow. Their name is going to change, and they're going to be more associated with the Babylonians. But once again, now, are these Chaldeans individuals that Satan has the ability to control? Does he have the ability to lord over certain groups? Well, the answer to that is yes, because there are certain groups that worship him and serve him. We're going to see that as we go forth. Even when we get into the book of Daniel, we're going to see that God is going to show that majority of these nations are ruled by a variety of things that have the enemy, that have Satan behind it. And so in the book of Daniel, we see the head of gold, the breastplate of the shoulders of silver, and the loins of brass, and then the iron legs, and so forth and so on. Each one of those represented a kingdom. But what it stated was that each one of those kingdoms had a level of satanic and demonic power behind it, and it was called the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Grecia, and so that gives us once again a light into that. And once again, I can spend a lot of time on that, but I just wanted to just bring that out. So these Chaldeans once again have some sort of ear that Satan can whisper into to give direction, and they go forth and they're like, all of a sudden, today is the day. We're going to go and we're going to get those camels. We've been always wanting those camels. Job's got a whole bunch of good camels, and I've been lusting after them and wanting them, and I'm going to get them. Now, let me just add this in here to this. I add my own kind of perception, and I make sure I highlight that as saying, I'm adding it. But when you look at the Chaldeans, and you can make a connection and it's just me making a connection, doesn't mean that's how it was. But let's just say that they were lusting after those camels all this time. I want them camels. And so what are they doing? They're coveting. Well, one of the scriptures, one of the commandments that is given to us is, thou shalt not what? Covet. Well, one of the reasons maybe, now let me just make this connection. You could take it or leave it. Maybe one of the reasons why God doesn't want us to do certain things is because what it does is it breaks the ability for Satan to have your ear. Because if you didn't covet the camels, Satan wouldn't have been able to whisper, you know what? Today's the day to go get them camels. That's what you need to do today, to go get them. Because if you keep those little cracks in your armor, Satan can come in and speak to you. Could have been the same thing with the Sabaeans. Maybe all this time they've been lusting after, those ox and those sheep. I mean, those what was it? The Sabaeans came and they took they took away, whatever they took away.
The asses.
The donkeys and the kids. But the Sabaeans came and they decided they're going to take the camels. All right. So I just throw that out there as a possibility, that we have to be careful sometimes of the things that we allow to operate in our heart and our mind, as to what place or space we may be given to Satan to be able to come in at a later time and whisper in our ear and get us into that mode. Get us into that ability to just be like, okay, I can fly off the handle now. All right. Did you want to say something?
No, it had kicked me off.
All right. So it's important then to just keep that in mind. And like I said, I throw that out there as just something to think about. All right. Let's look at verse 18. And it says, and while he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in your eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness. All right, interesting. There came a great wind. Who's considered the prince and the power of the air? Satan. All right, and so this great wind come from the wilderness. Remember when Jesus was tempted? Where was he tempted? In the wilderness. And in the other book that we're studying, the book of Exodus, we're getting ready to get to that part where they're coming out of Egypt. But when they come out of Egypt, they're going into the what? Into the wilderness. And they're going to meet a whole lot of challenges out there. So it's funny how that wilderness has a. It's like when you're out there, you're in a place where things just kind of grow on their own without any direction. It's like if your mind doesn't have any direction or any governing by the word, it's in a wilderness state. It's almost akin to being carnal. All right, there's life, but not the right kind. All right, and so it says that this wind from the wilderness, and it smote the four corners of the house. It just happened to hit the house just right. We've seen these signs, these TV shows, these news reports of these tornadoes. We've seen these things. These things come through and they tear up what? Everything. It looks horrible. And so you can imagine that you got something like that where this wind comes out of the wilderness and it falls on the young man, and they are all dead, and only I am escaped. And so now all of this happened. It all is presented to Job in a natural setting. These natural things were taken from you. These natural people, your sons and your servants, are dead. And the reality of it is, it's all what? Spiritual. This came directly from Satan. This was an attack from the spiritual realm. And oftentimes we don't look at it. We get mad at the president. We get mad at government. We get mad at our cousin. We get mad at our neighbor. We get mad at all these natural folks when the real issue is spiritual. So what we see here is, look at Job's reaction. For somehow or some way or another, Job was able to just calm his natural man. And look what he says. Then Job arose, he rent his mantle, in other words, his covering, shaved his head. Well, all he's doing by doing that is saying that I'm torn in heart. And the shaving his head means he's humbling himself. And fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Job went spiritual with his grief. You see why God said that there's none like him on the earth? Job went spiritual. Job didn't say, I'm going to go get me a gun, like how we would do. We go to the drawer looking for a knife. I'm gonna go get my old 22, and we're gonna take care of business here. Job wasn't doing that. He wasn't going out looking for the Sabaeans and for the Chaldeans. He wasn't looking for the contractor that built the house that the children were in so he can sue them because you didn't build the house strong enough. Job got down. He humbled himself. He showed his ripped heart. In other words, that ripping of his mantle, of his covering, means I'm brokenhearted. Just because this has happened, don't think that I'm not hurt. I'm hurt deeply. Shaved his head. I'm humiliated. I'm humbled. I'm just, he's just letting that show. Those were the two natural things that he did. The spiritual thing was he bowed himself to the ground and he worshiped. And then he said these words. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. And here it is again. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, all Job did right then was he looked to God. He's looking to the spiritual creator of all things, irregardless of all the natural turmoil that he had, that happened to him. All right? And so that's the beauty of what we can pull out of this first chapter of Job, as we recognize that Job still, even though he may not have been able to explain to you why I'm worshiping. Well, Job, you just had all this happen. Why are you worshiping? It was a reaction. Job's reaction was so keen to automatically go to spiritual. And Lord knows, that's what I need to get to. I need to be able to get to that. That's what I need help at. I don't know about you all. Maybe y'all can do that on a regular basis. And don't get all heated and heartbroken and mad and fighting back and kicking. How we sometimes want to do. But I want to be able to go right to God's good regardless, and it's going to work out. It's going to be all right. God is still on the throne. I want to be able to get there, and I'm saying that confess. I ain't there, but I know where I need to be. But that shows us there. All right. A lot more we could say on that, but we're going to move on. Anybody else have any comments?
Did you read 22?
No, 22 says, in all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And he didn't.
I think that's a very important one that needs to get in there.
That's true. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
He did not charge God wrong.
Right. Exactly. He saw it as a sense that God can do no wrong. See, if you truly believe in your heart that God is perfect, there's nothing that God can allow to happen to you that's wrong. But he knew that it was just, things happen. He's seen it happen. Now, the rest of this book, well, we're going to see. We're going to go back into the spiritual realm now for this next chapter. But then for the majority of the rest of the book, we're going to just stay in the natural, trying to watch people go back and forth, communicating. We're going to dissect all their reasonings as to why they think this happened and I think this. And these are thoughts, and these people that are talking to Job are not idiots, and they're not dumb, and they're not novices on life and how. They're very intelligent people, but they're still wrong because they don't understand certain things about what God says and what God reveals about himself. And it's important for us to recognize that. So when we look at that, we just like, wow, okay, Lord, help me to make sure that I get there. I see this, and I recognize. I'm like Isaiah when he saw something, when he saw the presence of God. He's like, woe is me of unclean lips. And when I read this beautiful stuff in the Word, and you really sit down and I digest it, I'm like, wow, because I get mad, I get defensive, I get frustrated, I get. I'm trying to protect my own situation here. These guys coming in, these Sabaeans and these Chaldeans coming in, and I got to find a way to protect me. Get myself, and that's my natural reaction. Job's natural reaction here was worship. Wow. All right, and just recognizing that God still got it under control and not panicking, but yet still being hurt. Ripped his mantle, still feeling humbled. He shaved his head, but still worshiping, staying spiritual. All right, and so we got to recognize that we should walk by faith and not by sight. That's what Job just did here. All right, any other comments or questions? If not, let's go into Job chapter 2. Let's see, we got about a half hour to see if we can finish this up. I'm going to try to play this once again right through the Zoom call, so hopefully everybody can hear it. So I'm going to switch on the sound through the music here. Let's share, and hopefully you can hear this very well. Let's go to that now.
Chapter 2. Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said,
From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God, and escheweth evil? And still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him, to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord, and said,
Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him,
Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die.
But he said unto her,
Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?
In all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off, and knew him not, they lifted up their voice, and wept, and they rent every one his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Chapter 2.
All right.
Again there was a day when
We can stop that now. All right. So now we see this second episode of this situation, where we see a situation of spiritual action, but then being manifest in the natural. Now, let me just say this. How much of what you think is going on in the natural is having any correlation to what's actually happening in the spiritual? And my answer to that question would be nothing can happen in the natural that doesn't have a spiritual foundation or spiritual root, be it spiritually good or spiritually evil. Because that dimension is the chief reality to this dimension according to the scripture. All right? The spiritual realm is more real and more lasting and more eternal than the natural. The natural can come and fade. A good example, once again, and I've used this before, is when we take our natural dimensional reality, our three-dimensional reality, and with our half dimension of time, and look at a lower dimension that we can see. That lower dimension that we can see is shadows. So you can go and you can cast a shadow somewhere, and that shadow is there. And as long as you have the object there and the light, the shadow will be there. But how lasting is the shadow? The shadow is only there as long as you are there where you can cast the shadow, as long as the light is shining. The shadow's not it's real, it's a real thing, but it's predicated on the natural thing that's casting it. So the shadow, though it's real, is not as real as the thing casting it. Similarly, you naturally are not as real as the shadow that projects you. Your spiritual reality, I should say, not your shadow. Your natural man is not as real as the spiritual man that projects you. So that's something to keep in mind when we start thinking about why God is allowing this to happen. Suppose you cast a shadow and I all of a sudden just put something in front of your shadow so your shadow doesn't show anymore. Well, it's only temporarily. It's not really painful eternally. It's just you don't see your shadow no more. And that happens with us in the natural realm. That's why the scripture tells us that to live is Christ, but I'm getting the scripture wrong too.
For us to live is Christ, and
for us to live with Christ and to die is gain. I think that's the scripture I'm trying to remember. It's all getting convoluted sometimes. But my point being, by saying that, is that the natural life is but a shadow in comparison to the spiritual life. That's my point I'm trying to make out. All right. So when we look at this and we see this second chapter, and we see the very same thing happen. Again, there was a day when the sons of God were gathered. Satan came and he joined. And the same question was asked. But look at this now. This is after what happened to Job. And Satan said he's going to and fro and up and down. And look at verse 3. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? Now look at this. This is after all this has happened to Job. That there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man. And we talked about that perfection as being complete, upright, being he does what he knows is right. One that fears God. In other words, he loves the things of God. He fears God. He wants to know what God is revealing. I don't want to do my way. I want to do it God's way. And excuse evil. In other words, he doesn't like evil. So it's not that he just fears God. He also doesn't like evil. And we talked about that on last week, how some people can be a little bit of both. Some people can be really godly, but kind of still like a lot of evil stuff. And you say, well, how could that be? Well, there's a lot of godly people that covet and hate and jealousy and frustrated anger and all that kind of stuff. And you know, but still they try and love God. And there's some people that don't love God. They don't even believe in God, but are good people. They don't covet. They don't want your job. They don't want your car. They don't want your wife or your husband. They just good folks. And yet at the same time, they don't believe in God. But Job is one that has both. And we talked about that. So let's move on. And he's still, and look what he says. God said, and it says, and still he holds fast his integrity. And that's an important thing to keep in mind from what God is saying. God is saying Job is holding on to what he knows. He's holding on to although thou moved me against him. In other words, you challenged me, and I had to show you that you don't know me nor Job, the people that follow me. And you say, well, why would God want to prove anything to Satan? Well, my default answer to that is, I don't know. All right. Don't know what it is that Satan is trying to produce even before the garden, even before Adam and Eve, whatever it was going on. That's not been revealed. But I will say this. What it does do is God proves Satan to be what? A liar. He's not, what he said was not what? It wasn't true. Satan said, if you do this, he'll curse you to your face. And God said, no, he won't. And I'll prove it to you. And so God proved it to Satan. He allowed things to happen. And you say, well, if God already knows it, why does he even allow it? Well, because he has to allow us to know why it happened the way it happened. And see, so somebody might say, well, why are we going through all this? We're going through all this so we can understand why we are what God already knows we are. We're going through this so we can discover what God already knows about us. This thing's about us that we and how we are, how we think. Sometimes you ever be like, you ever put on some clothes and have on some dark blue and just know you got on black, and you walk outside and that sun hit it, all of a sudden you recognize, oh, I thought I had on black. These are blue. You got the wrong color on. You thinking you're doing one thing, but it's actually something else. Well, we also do that spiritually. We do that naturally, and we do that emotionally. We think we're a certain way, and we just going on about ourselves, thinking, well, I'm all together because I do this, or I believe this, or I think this. And then when you get around a certain situation that shines light on it, either by another person saying, well, you think you patient, or you think you kind, or you think you upstanding, but you should see yourself when you do this or when you do that. Have anybody ever pointed that out to you? And sometimes it gets to the point where we got to be like, wow, I got to do some correcting here because it's pointed out to me. Now, if you have integrity about yourself, when it's pointed out to you, you're going to humble yourself. I got to get it together. I got to work it out. You do what you know once it's shown. As you see the light, you walk therein. And that's what Job has. Job has a lot of integrity. And it's what God is pointing out. And so Satan he moved against him to tempt him. Job held on to his integrity. But Satan has one more scheme. And once again, I'm pointing this out. This is a spiritual attack. He goes to his skin for skin. You allow me to touch his life. He says, what a man wouldn't do to protect himself. And in verse 5, he says, but put forth thy hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And look at verse 6. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thy hand, but save his life. Now, that says a couple things. It tells us that one of the hedges that God has around Job, it was a hedge around him personally, that you can't touch him, which is why Job couldn't do nothing to his body. But even though he touched everything that affected him, he couldn't touch his body.
And Satan couldn't do nothing to his body.
The Satan couldn't touch his body. All right? Couldn't touch Job. So then, now God is saying, okay, Satan, I'm going to remove another hedge. And this hedge is the hedge that protects his body. So God removed the hedge around Job's body. Satan can now get to Job's body. But God has another hedge. And that hedge is around his life. He said, but you can't touch his life. So in other words, you can do everything you can to his body, but you can't kill him. And so it says that Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord once again and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his feet to his crown. From the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, he had boils. Satan tried to make him as miserable as possible. In our Exodus study, we're going to see this thing about boils again when we see that on Sunday, and we're going to talk some more about that specifically. But when we look at these boils here, we know that this was a sickness. It was something that made him sore. It made him achy. It made him disgusting looking. He had all kinds of pus and ooze coming out of it. Very uncomfortable. He certainly couldn't sleep. And in Job's description, as we go through this book, Job's going to describe his situation. We're going to get into more detail about what these boils are actually doing to him each and every day. All right. So now, once again, let's pause. Let's look at this. This natural thing that's happening to Job's body. It came from what? Something spiritual. It happened first in the spiritual, and then it came into and then it manifested itself in the natural. And once again, it was a situation of God recognizing the level of relationship that Job had with God, to a point where God says, even though I'm going to let you do this, I know Job better than you do, Satan. Satan thinks that people are like him. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. Sometimes we fall into that same trap. We think people are like us. Well, I like chocolate ice cream, so everybody's going to like chocolate ice cream. No, there's people that don't like chocolate ice cream. Just because I like it, that don't mean everybody likes it. And so sometimes we have to be careful that we don't do that. That's what Satan's doing, though. He's feeling that Job can't be any better than him. Because see, Satan thinks he's better than people anyway. Because when you look at the description of man was made from what? The dust of the earth. But you go into Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and look at what Satan is made of. He's made of every gem and every precious stone. That's what he's made of. So he's looking at, how can this dust of the earth be better than me? So if I am a certain way, they certainly are not better than me. Well, that's where he's wrong. And God knows that. And there are Job, you have Job, and you have people like Job, and people that strive to attain to these things that Job are doing. You know, that old song that says, please be patient with me. God is not what? Through with me yet. We're looking to develop and to grow. The same things that frustrated me a year ago, I don't want frustrating me next year, because I'm learning to give it over to God and trust in Him and recognizing that He's able to handle and do it. And not thinking that it has to be done by my power or by my strength. Because that can do what? Frustrate you and aggravate you. How is Job going to fix this? How is he going to get his camels back? How is he going to get his ox back? What's going to happen when he's got all these children to bury? You know, and yet how's he going to bury them and he ain't even in good health? It's just a lot here. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job got down and he worshiped. Well, let's look at this here. So in verse 8 it says, and he took him potsherd, in other words, pieces of broken pottery, and scraped himself withal. So now he done sat down somewhere and went into probably an outside area where he could scrape himself where those boils are and allow the pus to ooze out, and allow his skin to dry to where it becomes ash, and then he could just scrape it off. Not a pleasant thing. You can imagine that he doesn't smell very well. He definitely doesn't look very well. He's not very attractive right now at all. He's probably not feeling very well. So now he's in physical pain in addition to the emotional pain, to the heart pain, in addition to the sorrow of losing his children, of losing his wealth, losing all his servants. All right, let's keep going. Verse 9. Then said his wife, oh, here comes the wife, here comes the companion, here comes the friend, right? Unto him. And look what she says. Dost thou still retain integrity? Wait a minute. Ain't that what God said about Job? Look, if you read in chapter 2, the end of verse 3, it says God, he feared God and eschewed not evil, and still he hold fast his integrity, though thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. All right, and that's something else that I guess I should have pointed out, since I had to go back there to point that out about integrity. God says right here that from a natural standpoint, there was no cause. There was nothing that Job did naturally that caused this. And we're going to come back to this a little later on, but I just want to point that out because these other three friends that we're going to get introduced to are going to feel like they know the reason why. And they're going to have some answers for Job. And we're going to find out that that's not, that their answers are incorrect. But right now we're dealing with this wife. This wife says unto him, does thou still retain thy integrity? So one thing the wife knew, that Job was holding on to his integrity. She recognized it, just like God said it. God said he's holding on to his integrity, and the wife saw, he said, you are. You hold on to your integrity, but do you still do it? Are you still doing that? And she said, now, are you going to hold on to your integrity? Are you going to do this? And that, what we pointed out was that something that she recognized that Job was doing. But then she gives him a suggestion. She says, curse God and die. Now, you have to stop there for a moment and just say, okay, what avenue is she coming from? Is she saying curse God and die because she is feeling bad for Job's situation and saying, Job, with all that you've been through, and now you got to suffer this, you're in a state that's worse than death? Right? Maybe she's coming from that point of view. And if that's a point of view that she's coming from, you would see that as being a wife that doesn't want to see her husband what? Suffer. All right. But regardless as to what mode she's coming from, look at what Job's reaction is. And Job's reaction is the correct answer. Whether she's just mad at him or she's feeling sorry for him, either way, her action would not have been correct. Look at verse 10. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind, Job didn't call his wife a foolish woman. That's not what he said. And as a matter of fact, it almost can be pointed out as Job was saying, that's not how you normally talk. Now you're not talking like how you are. You are talking like one of the foolish women. In other words, this is not how you normally speak. So you're talking like one of the foolish women speak. And then, so he goes on to explain, what? Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? Now, that's an important thing to keep in mind. This is how I know Job, once again, is seeing this thing spiritually. Because look what he's looking at. He's not blaming the medical doctor. He ain't blaming the guy that coughed to him and gave him, some kind of boiled disease. He ain't looking at nothing else, but he's saying, I know who has the whole world in his hand, and that's the Lord. And if God decides to give me good, I know God has a good reason for doing it. And if God decides to give me bad, I know God's got a good reason for doing it. I'm telling you, this is why God said, have you considered this guy? Because Job's able to do that. I don't know that I can do that. I want to, and Lord, help me to keep developing and seeing my faults, that I can just say, hey, if I was to go bankrupt, I'd be like, hey, well, I've tried to do what I could do, but if God wanted me to God knows. And I've had wealth, and I had some substance, and now I don't. But God is in control, and he don't make mistakes ever. Now that's the answer. Job's answer right here really is the answer to almost everything in the Bible. It just covers it all. What he gives as to his wife, it's just saying, Job, why don't you just go on and just curse God? And he's saying, look, I received good at the hand of God. He recognized that everything he got that was good came from God. And then he says, shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Of course he didn't, because he's recognizing the sovereignty of God. If God wants to give me things that are difficult, I'll take it. If God wants to allow blessings to come, I'll take it. I know that I'm in the hand of God, and God cannot make any mistake. That's faith in God. He don't need to know why. He don't want the mathematics. He don't need the scientific test. He just believes God. See, I always, and I'm trying to wean myself, I always want to understand, well, why is this happening? Give me the mathematics. Give me the understanding. Give me the probabilities. Give me the things so I can, the formula or the understanding so I can do the right pieces here. But it ain't all about that. It's all about just know God and know who He is. He can't make a mistake. And He's never wrong. And He won't put more on me than I can bear. Those are things God's revealed to us. Now, do you believe those things He revealed? If you believe it, then you're going to talk like Job. If you don't believe it, you're going to get mad and frustrated and defensive and fighting and anger. And all that stuff is going to come up. It's going to come out of us. Because it's in us if we let it out. All right, let's finish up. Verse 11. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all the evil that was come upon him, they came everyone from his own place. So we got Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. All right. Now you say, well, of all 3 of these guys, which one is the shortest? You say, well, what are you talking about? Well, let's look at their names. Which one is the shortest? And I can tell you, the shortest guy is Bildad. You say, well, why is Bildad the shortest guy? Well, because he's only a shoe height. His height is only the height of a shoe.
Jesus Christ.
That was really bad, wasn't it? All right, let's move along. Away from my bad humor here.
Do you want me to disconnect now?
Oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Don't quit your day job.
I won't quit it. Okay. Bildad the shoe height. All right. So verse 12. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off, and they knew not him. In other words, when they looked at Job from afar off, Job looked so bad they didn't even recognize him. All right. And they lifted up their voices and they wept, and they rent everyone their mantles. So they ripping their clothes now, and sprinkled dust upon their heads. They ain't shaved their head. Well, I'll put some dirt on it. I ain't gonna shave my head because I don't have to humiliate myself. But they did try to show some humility, and they lifted their heads towards heaven. Verse 13. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spoke a word unto him, for they saw his grief was very great. Now, we have to close with this. They saw his grief was very what? Great.
Great.
Now, I have to emphasize this because what that tells us is that just because, for whatever reason, Job is able to pull from his understanding and what he recognized and believes about the revelation of God, that he will put no more on me than I'm able to handle, it doesn't take away that he was what? The grief of him was very great. He was hurt. But he directed his hurt not at somebody else, not at the world, not at the nation, not at the family. He directed his hurt into an understanding that God is still on the throne. He's still in charge. And I can be hurt, but recognize that I must be hurting for a purpose and for a reason and for God's plan and for whatever it is. He gives that honor to God being omniscient and all-powerful, and him being not knowledgeable and unaware as to the plan or whatever it is God's trying to reveal. And so he's walking by faith. Because see, if you see something and you understand it, you don't have to do what? You don't have to just trust in faith. You can just know it. But Job doesn't know what's going on, and he's walking by faith. All right. So we're going to stop there. The rest of this book, for the next 30 chapters, we're going to watch Job's friends try to explain to Job what's going on with him. And they're going to come up with a lot of different philosophies and a whole lot of different stuff. This is going to look like you sit down in your living room, you sit down with Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like Job sitting down. He's got all these friends that come by, and they're going to sit down in his living room and tell him why God did this to him. But Job's going to defend himself pretty good. All right? And so we'll pick up on that a little later. All right. Any other comments or questions? All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to